Hello world, it's Austin. Let's talk about being transgender and Christian. Gosh, I'm glad to be back making these videos after my little hiatus. Thanks for sticking with me while I did some recuperating from surgery. I'm feeling awesome, and I am excited to get back to talking about faith and gender identity and sexuality and love and all kinds of stuff. But today's video is sort of an inverse resource spotlight because I've recently been made aware of the fact that there are basically no resources on trans issues for youth group leaders. This sucks. I've come across some really great resources for churches as a whole to become more welcoming and more knowledgeable, and resources directed towards adults specifically, but considering the number of teenagers that come out as LGBT, our youth ministry programs need to have something to say. My first thought was that maybe churches are so new to this whole being LGBT affirming thing that they just haven't had time to create resources that include trans people. But then I thought, heck no, that can't be it, because some more liberal churches like the United Church of Christ, which have been affirming of LGBT people since 1985, they're just getting on board with all this kind of stuff and having these resources available for youth leaders and adult leaders alike. Even churches like the Episcopal Church USA and the Evangelical Lutheran Church, which have been affirming for only a short amount of time, have still had several years to come up with something. I think there are two problems that are blocking the way here. The first one is that people are scared to talk about issues that might be divisive in their communities. And that's legit, but also, you know what else is divisive in communities? Like, teens dying because nobody's supporting them, so... The other main problem that we see is that in youth groups and youth ministry programs in general, we are still too focused on looking cool and hip and not actually being relevant to teenagers' lives. I worked as a youth pastor for a year while I was in seminary, and I took several classes on youth ministry, and the one thing that kept coming up over and over in our case studies is that it doesn't matter if you have programs based around like paintball outings or if you have flat screen TVs in the youth room. That's not what actually get the kids there. What teenagers actually want, and what keeps them coming back, is the creation of a safe space with their friends, and sometimes adults they trust, where they can ask big questions like, does God exist? And, who is that God? And why do bad things happen? And why do I feel alone sometimes? And these huge questions. What they don't want is platitudes and easy answers. They want to be able to figure things out for themselves, and they want you to come alongside them and figure that out with them, not for them. And in a group of 10 teenagers, statistically, you've got at least one that is LGBT and is wondering what God thinks about that. Most mainline churches right now are stuck in this position where they have a rainbow flag out front or say all are welcome on the sign, but don't actually talk about LGBT issues at all. It's just sort of like a thing to get people in the doors, and then once you're in, it just fades away. And as a trans person, of course, I'm more likely to walk into a church that has some sort of affirmation on the outside that tells me I won't get kicked out, but I'm more likely to stay in a church if the teaching and preaching has some relevance to my life. Not every Sunday. I mean, you don't have to preach on gender identity issues all the time. Once in a blue moon would be nice. Okay, so back to trans affirmation in youth groups. If you've got 10 kids and one of them is LGBT, are you not going to bring up anything about sexuality and gender identity for fear of, making the other 9 uncomfortable somehow? Or in reality, it's actually so that you don't make their parents uncomfortable? But here's the reality. If we don't talk in our churches about issues like racism and sexism and sexual identity and gender identity and these kinds of things with our teenagers and in our congregations, then these kids are going to grow up thinking that their faith has absolutely nothing to do with the way they live their lives. And they're going to stop coming to youth group because the connections feel inauthentic. So, do we give up on that one kid? Well, if you know the story that Jesus tells about the shepherd in Matthew 18, you already know the answer to this question. Jesus says in verses 12 and 13, "What do you think? If a shepherd has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountainside and go in search of the one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he rejoices over it more than the 99 that never went astray." That one LGBT kid in your youth group matters. So, if you're a youth leader, do your kids know that you support them no matter who they love or what their gender identity is? Do they know that if it was relevant, you would be there for them through the coming out process? Do you share stories of biblical outsiders to help them know that God is with them through their journey? I've been approached by over a dozen trans teenagers in the past couple of months, and they're hungry for theology that includes them. And if we ignore that, we're ignoring not only these kids that I have talked to, but they're a drop in the ocean of all the LGBT kids in our churches right now. So what are we going to do about that? One glimmer of hope that I found while I was researching recently is the Progressive Youth Ministry Conference, which is happening in February, I think, in Dallas, Texas. So I'll link that down below. There's preaching by the always amazing Allison Robinson, and there's actually a seminar called Ministry to Trans Youth, which is taught by a gender nonconforming person of color, so that's awesome. I hope that conference gets people thinking about what we can do in youth ministry and what youth ministry actually needs when it comes to these issues. If you have resources for talking to youth about trans and LGBT issues, put them in the comments below or tweet me right here. You can always get a hold of me on Twitter, that's the best place to reach me. As always, I would love to hear from you. And now that we're back from hiatus, I'm going to be back here on this channel every Wednesday with a new transgender and Christian video. And I would love to get this channel to over 500 subscribers by next week. Can we do it? Alright gang, I hope you're having a great Wednesday. I will see you back here again next week. Peace.